It's a matter of life or death. It's the worst catastrophe in economic and social terms since the end of the Second World War. These are words of the Chancellor of the country, which today took over the presidency. So the relevance of our topic is evident. Hello, everybody. My name is Wolfgang Wessels. I'm chairing this meeting for discussing how the European Council can deal with the crisis and beyond. My suggestion is that we should follow, also for future work, a AAA approach. AAA means analysis, assessment, and advice for action. So how do we analyze situations? What is our assessment? And what could we propose for actions? Now, the agenda is clear. I would have 7 small points, short. The first one is, I think, again, and perhaps more than ever, the European Council is in the center of this presidency. It's not just because of the Corona Recovery Fund and the multi-annual financial framework, but also of Brexit, and also in terms of dealing with the EU's role in the international system. And of course, with each presidency, we don't know what will come. So the unknown is quite a phenomenon for each presidency. So a first assessment is, will the European Council under this presidency be able to deal with these issues? The second point is a clear key for this issue, or for solving and making the EU survive, is to deal with the recovery fund and the multi-annual financial framework. And there we analyze it. There are a lot of related topics, more than before when we had the debates about own resources in multi-annual financial frameworks, since the Delors package, by the way, in the 80s. Now we have issues like the size of the recovery fund, the size of the budget, the balancing between the question of loans and grants, the balancing between policy fields. Do we continue with past dependencies, stressing common agricultural policy and cohesion fund, or do we move to new issues like the green fund, the defense issues, migration, and digitalization? Will we continue to have the normal confrontation between net payers and net receivers? Will there be the issue of rebates more than before? Will we have new sources for the income, new taxes? This is, I think, an issue which is clearly related. So on the agenda for these poor people in the European Council, and I think Alex will tell us more about them because he worked there a couple of times, is that they have a very long and complicated agenda to deal with. Now, our assessment, is there enough room for some kind of overall package? Is there something where at the end everybody could contribute? That leads to the third point. What is the internal life of this? We see a couple of new coalitions, like the 4 frugal countries. You see, of course, the Visegrad countries. We see cleavages apparently between some southern countries, some eastern countries. We see the general issue of net receivers and net payers. We see something like the attempt of a Franco-German leadership coming up again with, let's say, I think quite a lot of us were surprised about how strong they are taking up the claim to be the informal leaders. The question for the internal life, of course, is how the President of the European Council can manage it, what role the Commission can play in this setup, and what kind of consensus at the end could come up in this context. The fourth point is, what does it mean for the institutional architecture? And in this sense, I think it's a multi-level veto player game. On the European level, it's the European Parliament. It sometimes seems to be forgotten by some. And on the national level, and there Mandate will come in, it's the national parliaments, of course, who are veto players and who needs to be taken into account. And we will get more about that later on. The fifth point is what was raised as Hamiltonian moment. Will the European Council taking decisions which lead to some kind of more state building, like apparently this was the case with Hamilton in the early history of the United States? Or my argument would be, it's another case of the Monnet moment, to take limited but real steps forward towards more integration on what I would call a fusion ladder. The sixth point is, very short, what is our advice for the political community? Do we have something to propose to them now? Or can we just say it's very complex and very has a lot of problems? My last point is, because we are also part of the academic community, what is our advice for the academic community? What should we teach on the European Council? What should we research? And this is part of also what I'm doing at the University of Cologne with a project which is called TRACK, Studying the European Council. So I think we have a lot on our agendas. We have a lot of very good persons to contribute. They all have, if I may call that, a mixed background. That means they have been in politics, in academia, in different academia, in European academia. I think all three of you somewhere were linked to the College of Europe at one stage of your life. So I think that's a very good sign that we have some kind of follow-up to what we normally offer at the College of Europe each year and at other places too. We now will have, perhaps Alex will mention that, a new master at the School of Transnational at the School of Transnational Action. So we have there this kind of development of looking at the governance of European Union. We have also, you see also Johannes, who was very helpful to organize everything, and he will also look at the questions which you will raise, and he will put that together so that we have a lively debate at the end. We will start with Brigid, who, as you know, is the director of the Robert Schuman Center at the European University Institute, coming from Ireland with a lot of different academic experiences and also activities. I remember very well how you contributed to the yes of the Irish referendum, at least for the Lisbon Treaty, I think before too at another referendum. But I think so, you have a lot of experiences, and you have worked on the budget, you have worked on the governance of Europe in different forms and ways. So I'm very much interested in your analysis and assessment. Perhaps you can also add a little bit to the Irish position in this context, because that might give us an additional flavor. Brigid, it's your turn now.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wolfgang. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to see you all, albeit remotely. I think we can all agree with Wolfgang's outline of the challenging agenda that the European Council and the EU faces at this juncture. In terms of what I want to focus on, I will mix my analysis, assessment, and advice. It won't quite be structured into the three baskets. So let me begin first with an advice point, and that is that when you have a very long and difficult political and policy agenda, there is limited bandwidth for heads of government to handle this, limited in terms of time, limited in terms of the capacity to respond. So in my view, sequencing really matters. How the European Council handles the sequencing in this agenda from here on out really matters. Otherwise, the agenda becomes overcrowded, interconnected, and nothing happens. So looking at that complex agenda, what is the most urgent thing for the EU to do today? I have no doubt what that is. The most urgent agenda item facing the European Council is to conclude by the end of July a broad political agreement on the MFF and the recovery instrument. I think that is so important to the future of the EU and political stability in Europe. Why do I say that? COVID-19 was a symmetrical shock. It came from outside, but it has had asymmetrical impacts on different parts of Europe. It has been, some countries have had more fiscal space than others to respond. All have had to respond with a very significant use of public funding. But it's not accidental, for example, that 50% of all of the state aids has been by the Berlin government. In other words, Germany had the financial power and the bandwidth. It is really important that Europe recovers in a balanced way. Anything that drives divergence within the Eurozone and within the EU more generally is extremely bad for the future of the EU. I would also say that I am very confident that by the end of July, there will be a broad agreement. Why do I say that? I say that because even the Frugal Four have acknowledged that something needs to be done, that there has to be a response. And they have accepted the architecture. They haven't accepted the detail of the 22 proposals, and there is an awful lot of hard negotiation ahead. But they have accepted the principle that something needs to be done, that there has to be a recovery instrument, and therefore, in my view, there will be an agreement. And that agreement will test the capacity of the European Council because it's very complex. There are 22 proposals on the table. It looks both at the expenditure and revenue side of the budget, but it's very important that this proposal was called Next Generation EU. In other words, it's for the future of the continent. I think that there is the capacity there. It will be difficult. But it has also broken important taboos on the capacity of the Commission to raise serious funding for the member states, albeit for a limited time frame. So I don't regard this as a Hamilton moment, but it really is an important moment. And having worked on the budget now over a very long time, it is the most significant budgetary EU finance proposal since Delors I. And probably even more important than that. So I would say, unless the European Council can agree this, and in my view, there's an urgency about it, because we will only begin to see the economic consequences now of COVID-19. Without this, almost the rest of the agenda is very difficult. Now, I would add that these new instruments and proposals must be used to drive the climate and digital agenda as well, because these big ticket items have not gone away. They're no less serious and have got to be leveraged. So firstly, my assessment is there will be an agreement, there needs to be an agreement, and this is the most urgent. The second, Brexit. We will know over the summer if the Brexit negotiations are gaining traction. We've had the phony war where there's been a lot of debate and discussion, but very little breakthrough. So far, the Brexit negotiations are not moving towards an agreement. However, I think post-September, October, the European Council, and particularly Chancellor Merkel, will have an opportunity to devote some political capacity to the Brexit negs. And I think it is better for the EU that it reaches an agreement with the United Kingdom. Better for the UK as well. Why do I say that? Unless there's an agreement that can be built on over time, the EU is likely to face a very disruptive neighbour, a large, unsettled and disruptive neighbour, and that's not good. So the balance for the EU must be between reaching an agreement with the UK, but not breaking the central tenets of what a third country must do in order to have access to the European market. And I would say three things. are important. Firstly, watch the four freedoms. Do not allow the UK cherry pick across the four freedoms. Insist at all costs on a single governance architecture. The UK wants multiple agreements, at least 10, with different conflict resolution, dispute resolution mechanisms. That is a recipe for, in my view, constant conflict and contestation. So I would go to the wall on a single governance architecture, and then the level playing field. Why do I say that? Because the UK is now governed by a party and a government that is driven by ideology, driven by politics, and it is unclear to me what kind of UK emerges from this. And therefore the EU has got to ensure that it is not damaged from the outside. But EU should compromise on fish, it should be creative on the level playing field, but it should get an agreement. And then against the background of those two sequencing agendas, I think Europe cannot afford to ignore what's happening in the world beyond. In comparative terms, the EU has had a relatively good COVID. If you look at what's China, it originated in China, and China hid the pandemic from the rest of the world for a crucial period, which has impacted on us all. China is becoming much more assertive. We see what it's doing today in Hong Kong. Europe needs in a way to get much tougher with China, less naive, and has got to use the bargaining chips it has. But equally with the United States, I think a lot depends in the next phase whether we are dealing with Trump 2 or Biden 1. If Europe confronts Trump 2 in the next period, then I think Europe has got to have a very hard look at what that means for global governance, what that means for a rule-based international system, and none of it is good. So I would say, I would position it as MFF, Brexit, external in the background. I'll make one final point about where the EU is at and the impact of successive crises. I think that the EU has hardened and toughened and generated more collective capacity over the last 10 years out of necessity. It was driven to it. It had no choice because otherwise key regimes would have collapsed. I think the EU is much more clear-headed and perhaps hard-headed about its interests. And that also matters. It's not that Europe's values don't matter, but those values must also be accompanied by a hard-headed analysis of what the interests are. So in a way, when looking at the EU and its governance from a polity perspective, what I think an interesting research agenda that I would propose would look at not just the internal dynamics of the European Council's relationship with the Parliament and with the Commission, but rather how collectively these institutions work together. In other words, how, where, and why has the EU strengthened its collective capacity? There are those who would use the word state and say it's state-like collective capacity. I wouldn't. But I think that's looking at the EU, we are dealing, as we enter the next decade of the 21st century, in my view, with a very different political animal, albeit with all of the roots and the path dependencies that have forged it. So I will leave it at that.
Yeah, Brigid, very, very much. Thank you. In Germany, we would now knock on our tables to thank you for your contributions, but that's not possible here. Alex, you are next. I think everybody knows you very well. We should stress again that you are now the director of the School of Transnational Governance in Florence. They all know your political career, both in European institutions as especially in Finland, but also your academic career. My students still quote your work on flexibility and differentiated integration. I think that's where you left some kind of traces in the academia. Alex, it's your turn now.
Thank you very much, Wolfgang, and please send my sympathies to your students. It's clear that there's been very little development and evolution in flexible integration, if that is the case, or perhaps they're just putting forward a very strong critique. It's very nice to see you, and the link to Bruges, which Wolfgang was making reference to earlier, at least in my case, comes from two factors here. One is that Wolfgang was teaching one of the main courses at Bruges on institutions and policies and polities, and then Brigid was teaching on national administrations, and I ended up teaching actually with Brigid at the College of Europe, and then taking over her course in due time. So it's really nice to be here and trying to stick to your analyze, assess, and action, and to Brigid's 3 points. I will also have 3 points, but I will give a very personal perspective. Number one, on the process of a European Council in these types of situations. Number two, on the substance of what we'll be seeing here in July, and very much probably following what Brigid just said. And then number three, I'll give you a guesstimate of what I think the outcome might be. Now, first on the process, Wolfgang, you started by quoting the Chancellor's speech from the German Parliament, and which was quite strong in terms of a historic moment and the rest of it. My first observation is that when you have the presidency and when you are in difficult situations, and whether you are Chancellor or Prime Minister, there is always a tendency to over-dramatize the situation. So that means that you sort of push the expectations quite high and try to explain, at least to your own public, that listen, we're in a really difficult situation, but we'll try to do the best thing we can. So basically what you're doing is you're raising the expectations that you're going to fail, but at the end of the day, because you will not fail, you'll end up looking quite good. I'm absolutely convinced, much like Brigid, that at the end of the day, there's going to be a solution. There always is. We have a tendency to over-dramatize the situation, but I've said it before and I'll say it once again. It usually goes in 3 stages. Number 1 is crisis. Number 2 is chaos. And number 3 is suboptimal solution. That's basically what the European Union is about. But we have a tendency, whether in the academic world or in public discourse in general, to try to create some kind of a European utopia where we think that we'll find a perfect solution. We never will. The difference this time around is that, well, actually, the solution is going to be pretty damn good, relatively speaking, to what we usually get in financial crisis or others. A further observation on the process. I did my first EU presidency as a civil servant at the Finnish Permanent Representation in Brussels in 1999. And one thing that I learned then, and I'll stick to that thesis, is that it's the agenda that makes the presidency, not the presidency that makes the agenda. So if there is nothing major going on, no matter how much you hype up your presidency program, which essentially really is just to get your administration at home abroad, your presidency is not going to be a success. But if you have some kind of a big ticket, like the MFF, like COVID, like Brexit, like elections in the United States, you're damn right the presidency is going to be important. And that's kind of almost a set agenda for the German presidency. So they haven't really made it. So all of these people who say that you can prioritize during the presidency, no, you really can't. I mean, you can bring in a few nice little fig leaves, whatever the subjects might be, to make people happy. But at the end of the day, it's a managerial job. Now, in preparing a European Council, still here on point number 1 and the process, the way in which it usually works, and I saw actually Guy Milton, one of the old guys from the Council Secretariat online as well. So I'd be interested to hear his views if he wants to take the floor at some stage. But basically what happens is that it's the council secretariat, and I think if the old team is still there, it's going to be people like Jim Claus, etc., who start preparing the text for the council conclusions, and then of course do it in cooperation with the sitting presidency and in cooperation with some of the big players. COREPER has a bit of a fig leaf discussion on this, because COREPER will just try to indicate what the national perspective is going to be. The ambassadors are great, but they're not, doing the drafting as such. The real drafting at the end of the day comes from the Sherpa group, basically the right-hand men and women of the prime ministers, chancellors, and presidents. So it's the likes of Uwe Korsepius in Germany or Clément Beaune in Paris that do the work, and they are the guys who make the phone calls in advance. And usually, it's like a social club. Who you need to talk to and who is relevant and who is not. So it's very much a social exercise. So excuse me to all of those who think that this is part of some kind of a big scheme and rational choice and game theory, and it's not. It's human beings interacting on different issues and then coming up with a pretty haphazard outcome. There are other things that sort of play into the game here. One of them is, of course, media and how that is hyped up. I think the drivers in Brussels right now are pretty much Financial Times and Politico, who set the agenda in one way or another. Many others try to bring in their own views. It could be Reuters, AFP, it could be Le Monde, Figaro, whoever, but Frankfurt Allgemeine Zeitung, or Spiegel. But the bottom line is that they're sort of just, how would I say, nagging at the foot. It's important because it's somewhere in the heads of the Sherpas and the prime ministers, etc., etc. Then there's one really important process issue here, and this is going to, I think, determine whether there's a deal or not. And I don't have the latest information on this, but I think I do. And that is the meeting going to be physical or virtual? Because if it's virtual, there ain't going to be a deal. If it's physical, there is going to be a deal. Because these virtual meetings are simply not working on a European Council or Council level. You just simply don't have the human touch, and you don't get the same drama because you don't have the press waiting there overnight. You don't take the breaks. You don't have the confessionals and the rest of it. It's much more difficult to do it virtually than physically. If the meeting is physical, at least one of them, as I think it will be, then I think we'll get a deal. Remember that the European Council is actually a big psychotherapy session. These heads of state and government come into the room. They're completely shattered and tired. They come from their home parliaments, their home media. They've been beat 24 hours, 7 days a week. And finally, the doors close. They're 4 civil servants, in other words, outsiders. And then there are the interpreters who are in booths. So for them, this is like a respite. It's like, whew, I get out of here. This is great. Now I'm in the meeting. And it feels quite good. The first round of discussions is usually really boring because the president in this type, Charles Michel, will ask every member state to give their view. And sometimes it's reading off the paper, sometimes it's extremely boring, but usually nothing happens. So that's when people are playing on their phones and sending messages and looking at the media, what's going on, and sometimes sending messages to their own advisors and saying, this is boring, did you hear what that one said? And so of course breaching all confidentiality rules and the rest of it, but that's just how it goes. I'll come still on the process side. I think a lot of people simplify things before these meetings, and I guess we have to do it, North versus South, Frugal 4, Franco-German axis, net contributor, net receiver, and so on and so forth. It's probably much more complicated at the end of the day. Someone takes the leadership in the meeting, and I can say this, I've said it publicly as well. There's one person who's beyond anyone else, and that's Angela Merkel. She's the one who can basically, and I sat next to her for a year in the European Council, so I've seen her work. She has mastered the 2 key things that you need to master in these meetings. One is the oratory and the speech, and the other one is the minute detail and drafting. And she's extremely good at both. You know, you have some who are really good at one or the other, but very few, you know, who are good at both. And of course, when she says something, the room is silent. You know, you can hear a pin drop, and she can say, okay, I have this little change to the text. I'll just give it to the president. She'll walk around and give it. And she's also very open and good in the sense that, you know, she has no problems in consulting in the middle of things, her advisors. That's what I did myself as well. I'd send a message to say, listen, come outside the door. I need some advice. What the hell is this? And you know, if you do that, then you have a much better touch of what's going on. So on the process, this is the type of dynamic. Then at the end of the day, you know, there are a few interruptions. It could be well, certainly there'll be an all-nighter. I've done 3 MFFs in various capacities. As Europe Minister was the toughest. The MFF for 2014-2020, and that was very much an all-nighter. But what you try to do is take 15-minute cat naps, and then you're much fresher than the others, and try to feed the council secretariat with your text to get the stuff through. I'll be very much shorter on the 2 other points. One is on substance. Yes, I think there'll be a link, of course, between the MFF and the recovery fund, but many of you will have noticed that if you look at the 4 key priorities of the German presidency, what they have done is they've decoupled these 2. And they've done it for a simple reason. They understand that if these 2 go together, MFF and the recovery fund, then it can be seen as an institutional power grab coming from the Commission, because the Commission would not like to have anything more than these 2 coupled in one way or another, because then you can get into a debate about own resources and, you know, paying back the recovery fund within 40 years and expanding the MFF, etc., etc. But the German presidency, as shrewdly as the Commission, has decoupled this. Brexit is probably not going to be that big of an issue during the July European Council, but it'll come back because you can, at the European Council, you can really only have one battle. You can't have many fronts at the same time. So I think, you know, what we'll be seeing is probably a sequence of European councils dealing with a few big issues. Number one is going to be the MFF recovery fund. I think it's going to take 2 European councils, not 1. And then the second one is going to be Brexit in the fall. And the third one is going to be a bit more sort of broad after the US presidential elections. So we'll see those coming out. Outcome. And my final and third point here, I'm not saying I disagree with Brigid, because I very rarely do. But she said that the EU has had a relatively good COVID. No, Brigid. The EU has had a bloody excellent COVID. This is probably the best crisis that the EU has ever had. I mean, yeah, I put the 2, 3, 4 first weeks. I mean, but remember that, you know, with, for instance, the financial crisis, the euro crisis, and I saw George Papakonstantinou on the line there as well. You know, it took us basically 4 years to get this going. And I don't know how many governments toppled during those 4 years. We still basically have all governments intact, and the biggest recovery fund and the biggest recovery package that we've seen in European history. And I just, you know, I have sorry I say this, but I can say this now that I'm an academic. I have so much Schadenfreude, so much joy to look at all of these anti-Europeans and so-called critics, you know, from Krugmans to Stiglitz's to whatever. I mean, I haven't heard these guys once complain about the European. Even Martin Wolf, I mean, probably the most cynical economic journalist in the world, he's saying that, well, I have always said that the EU comes up with a good solution in the end. No, Martin, you have not, but it sure as hell has. So this has been an excellent crisis for the European Union. I think we've seen unprecedented speed, unity, and solidarity. And I think at the end of the day, we will see steps forward in European integration. As an academic agenda, I'll finish off with this. I think this is a comeback of the European Commission vis-a-vis the European Council. And one institution is going to be left out of this. And I say this with a little bit of sadness. That's going to be the European Parliament. It ain't going to be in this game at all. These were my points. Perhaps a little bit too blunt, but the lovely thing is I checked the list there. There's no journalist online.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. I think, Mendelte, it's now your turn. And you, of course, look especially at the national level and especially at national parliaments, because you worked in and for a national parliament, and you are now in the academic area. So you have both practical experiences as, let's say, the academic distance to what you did and what should be done. So, Mendelte, it's now up to you, and I'm looking forward to your PowerPoints.
Yes, thank you, Professor Wessels. And it's an honor indeed to present in the presence of two of my Bruges professors, the von Humboldt promotion way back. And now we're working together in the EUI stakeholder group on national parliaments. So that's great. Unfortunately, I would like to increase some complexity in this discussion. Because I've been asked to highlight one particular element of the European Council meeting, which is the domestic side and the two-level games that national leaders are playing effectively in this search for a compromise solution. And I would also like to focus on the 6 months ahead of us, because now we focus on the Council meeting itself, but what will come next. I will indeed try to go through 7 slides. Let me see how this works. Yes, if it's all correct, you can now see my slides. And I have subdivided them in 3 points with the aim of shortly highlighting what's the state of play in terms of democratic oversight, how to read that, the assessment, and, as I've been asked, looking ahead at advice for further action. So focusing on the democratic scrutiny of what is on the table in the European Council meeting. So obviously, and I can go through this very quickly, I guess, we've seen a first crisis reflex in rallying around the flag with national responses and a differential impact in the member states. Very interestingly, to explain all that, which has been going on in parallel political science projects, the degree of trust in government and society is an explanatory factor there. We've seen an impact on democratic oversight in the national parliaments. Here you see a picture of the Cortes, nearly empty, although big things had to be discussed, and that also comes to my 3rd or 4th bullet on this slide, which is the large impact upon the democratic oversight. And obviously, we have seen that many national parliaments have struggled with how to scrutinize national mandates in video conferences in councils when they were picked up again by the Croatian presidency in video format. What could parliaments do there, and how could they debate what was going on? So that's been a challenge across all the, I would say, 39 national chambers, and that's particularly difficult if you know that we'd only actually just begun with this interparliamentary exchange, which had been going on in the past decades in many issue-specific conferences with one, I would say, rather relevant aim and objective, namely common scrutiny upon national government's actions in the Council. So all national parliaments have their own ways of information gathering. They have their own information channels, nationally mostly, but sometimes also by stakeholders and lobbyists. And the idea is that parliaments share this information to improve their own scrutiny and obviously to make common statements there. There is a huge difficulty, or I would say there are many difficulties or challenges, if I may, which is that this interparliamentary playing field is very weak. People come and go. There's no structural networking. There's no institutional memory, as has also been experienced by the German parliamentary presidency, which also started today, and they have also had to reinvent the wheel when it came to organizing conferences, getting people together, especially obviously in COVID times. So this is a nascent playing field. It's very young. It's baby steps. And interestingly, what you saw in the past few weeks is that parliaments They tried everything to have video conferences, webinars, especially the assemblies did so. I don't know whether you followed the NATO Parliamentary Assembly and the OSCE, Inter-Parliamentary Union, all those clubs try to struggle to have like some kind of information sharing. And COSAC has actually also been online, organized by the Croatian Parliamentary. So you see that they have also voiced their concerns and said that how difficult it is for parliaments to do something there. If I would like to assess what's going on, the second point I would like to make, surely for everyone present, it's clear that leaders have to play at different chessboards. And although you could say that there's more need than ever for ownership at national level for what's going on, the playing field is only increasing. I put here a picture in my slide, which has been going around on Twitter. I don't know whether you recognize it, but it's a Dutch national magazine, Elsevier, which has had a cover on in which it, well, you could say the title was "Not a Penny More to Southern Europe." That's the left picture, and then you saw immediately a reaction from the southern member states saying, "Well, not a penny more to taxpayers' paradise." And then you see, you know, this very nasty conditionality debates that have played out, mostly to please audiences at a national level, which implies why it's so important to also take that level into account when we look at the European Council playing field. What very, very shortly, interesting developments were the op-eds, the letters sent by ambassadors and ministers in different national media, which is quite new, I would say. We've seen also a more fundamental debate responding also to the praise for Angela Merkel that Alex was voicing. The question is obviously, should national politicians shape public opinion domestically, or should they just follow public opinion domestically? And that's a very fundamental question that lays underneath what we see in the domestic field. Food for discussion. And I put here, well, just this picture of this parliamentary dimension mobile, automobile that's apparently driving across Brussels. I think that the summit is a big thing, but there will be lots of months ahead where the focus will be on the national capitals. Indeed, the income side of the budget and the recovery fund, the different regulations that have to be agreed upon. And the question is obviously, what role for national parliaments in the reform? I would say as a European, we would say, oh no, please not, because it is already so difficult. But being a citizen in a member state, you would say that you're being represented at the national level by your MPs and your national leaders, and you would like to have a debate there in the national parliament. And it's interesting that here in the Netherlands, in The Hague, I'm from one of the frugal 4 countries, we had an annual debate here on the state of the European Union last Monday, and I was struck by the fact that there was not a mention at all of this question. What is the role of us, a national parliament, in reform programs? I would say that the von der Leyen Commission has also made an omission in the working program by not mentioning any reform potential for having this national parliament role. This is a bit of a side discussion for today, but it's good to realize that there have been many reform proposals in the past few years. It's not being mentioned in the working packages, in the working program, which by many is seen is a disappointment, especially in the field of the Conference on the Future of Europe. That will be my last remark, because obviously the question is how to debate the future of Europe in post-COVID times. So thank you very much. These were my short remarks, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much for leading us into this field, which we know is more difficult than we quite often see, and also quite often frustrating, because national parliaments always claim that they would like to play a larger role, but you don't see it very often. They get. Now I turn to Ioannis. He comes in. We see him. Please start with the questions. As far as I see, we have one, but certainly there will be others coming up. So, Ioannis, it's now your turn.
Thank you very much, Professor Wessels and the panel. I would like to start by thanking the audience for the active participation. Given the time constraints, I can pose 2 questions to the panel. So question number 1, Andreas Billmeyer is asking the following. Typically, these deliberations, the next generation in EU plus the MFF, take a bit longer than expected. And we all wish that everything can be done and dusted in July. And the question is, what if it cannot? And given the national ratification processes required and the fact that the budget needs to be in place by end year, what is the drop dead date for a political agreement at the council level? And also to contribute to this discussion, I have also a question about the institutional architecture. And the question is the following. What is your expectation? This is question number 2. What is your expectation about the next steps in the European integration process? And how do you see a probable improvement, generally speaking, at the institutional level due to the current COVID-19 crisis?
Okay, who would like to come in on that? Alex, would you, especially for the first question, come in concerning the delay if July is not the date for having an agreement? How would you see the next steps?
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, pre-COVID, I had expected the deal to be struck sometime in December, if even then. So that's the usual sort of sequence. I mean, I don't have the exact data here, but my recollection is that MFFs are usually, last minute, last hour on the edge, and then everyone sort of says that we had to find a compromise, and then you go in front of your national media and say, look how well I did, can you see this kind of stuff? But I think there's a sense of urgency now. So to a certain extent, if I was in the room, I'd be saying that, listen, guys, this is a pretty low-hanging fruit here, that we can either over-dramatize this and destroy August and look really silly, or we can sit here a couple of extra nights and get it all done with, because, we are within reaching an agreement. And I think that's what will happen. Will there be a big significance if it doesn't? I think it's a bit of a communications hazard, and the EU and the leaders will look a bit stupid. So in that sense, low-hanging fruit, I think they will do it. As far as the next steps in integration, I mean, it's hard to say. I guess I'm still a little bit of a functionalist, neo-functionalist in many ways, that integration in one area leads to pressure to integrate in another one. But, if someone had said that we get into a financial crisis in 2008 and we, by 2016, have a banking union, a European stability mechanism, surveillance systems for banks, I would have said, dream on, mate. It ain't going to happen. So it's pretty much the usual pattern that the next steps in integration are quite often linked to a bigger crisis. I really like Brigid's comparison to the Delors 1 package. So probably the next steps in integration are going to be not only a bigger budget, but a budget funded by more own resources type of instruments. I also think that we're moving more towards flexible financial instruments, a la EIB or whatever you want to call it, Juncker plan or Invest EU. And I think whether these are steps forward or not, this whole debate on strategic autonomy or open strategic autonomy or whatever you want to call it, are going to be part and parcel of this. I think there's going to be some movement on digital and on health, but where the landing zones on this are, I don't know. Future of Europe conference, I'm of course, as an institutional nerd, always very hopeful. But to be honest, I think that the timing is going to be of essence, and also who leads it. Because if it's one of these Giscard d'Estaing type of characters, that's not gonna, how would I say, increase the sex appeal of a debate on the future of Europe. So, I think whoever they choose needs to be a good communicator and someone who gets inspired by Europe. Sort of the non-Macron needs to take over on that, and then we could see some steps in it. So it's the typical sort of European situation. But whatever happens, there will be steps further in integration because of this.
Okay. Brigid, would you like to come in?
So on the timing of the MFF Recovery Fund, I think there's a real urgency about July, because I don't think more time helps. We know what the issues are, and the question is, will the member states find the collective capacity, and those who have serious issues, and those issues have to be taken seriously in the negotiations, do they want to find themselves on the wrong side of history? So I don't think more time helps. But when I say July, I'm talking about the broad political agreement, the broad balances. But any change in own resources has to be ratified, as we know, domestically, and that brings in the multi-level parliamentary game, and that usually takes 1 to 2 years. So I'm not saying that all parts of this package can in any way be agreed by July, but the broad political balances. On the future of integration, it seems to me that it's pretty clear where the drivers. The world out there is a very unstable place, and it's not going in the kind of direction that Europe wants. Europe wants rule-based multilateral systems. So far, we're looking at a world that is clinging to the rule-based systems that are there, but they're weakening, and we're seeing the emergence of great power competition. So Europe has got to decide where it finds itself in this space, and it's got real power. Europe has 2 elements of power that it's going to have to use very strategically: trade and the size of the single market, and they're interconnected. So again, I think there needs to be a European response, and then the other drivers are clearly the climate crisis and digital. I would also think that political leaders, there has to be the Future of Europe conference, I always worry when we think a conference can somehow or other tackle the future of Europe, given the complexities of the problems we face. But I think an airing of what are the key agenda issues and priorities and challenges that Europeans face collectively, and how can they respond to them, would be very healthy. So I think the future of Europe as a deliberative process would be healthy. Whether that needs treaty change, in my view, depends entirely on what that agenda is. I think one impact of the COVID crisis has been that it has rehabilitated expertise. We don't want populists running our governments when faced with crises that require expertise. I think that's helpful, but unless you get balanced recovery, the populists have not gone away. So again, I think we have to watch the volatility in politics as being a very serious challenge.
Yeah, thank you very much. Midelke, what would be your points?
I'm always struck by that there's 2 images of European politics, which are, I would say, growing apart. On the one hand, there's this image that I think most of us here present share of piecemeal processes of European integration, Echte-Nacht-processions, 1 step ahead, 1 step back, and all in all heading in the direction of more fusion or integration. And that process has sped up in the past few months. But on the other hand, we also see this other image of European integration. And I think personally it has been made worse also by national leaders who portray the European Council Summit as a one-off win or lose situation to their domestic audiences. And there's this ghost of Euroscepticism hanging over the capitals. In all capitals we have it, or I would say many capitals we have it, not all. But I think the ghost of Euroscepticism is also partly created by national leaders by making this image of European integration as, again, a zero-sum game. You win, I lose, and vice versa. And I'm always, especially in this particular great audience, I'm really struck by how far these worlds are effectively apart.
Okay. Johannes,
Can I?
do you have
Can I just come in? No, I fully agree with Medelti, and that's why I was really glad to see her talk about the two-level games as well. And there's one thing I think we need to take quite seriously, but it's difficult to take seriously. It's the sort of interparliamentary cooperation that you talked about. I mean, I remember that, from my times in government and especially in executive power, it was one of these very much sidekicks. But to be honest, we need to get the national parliaments involved somehow in this process more seriously, and because otherwise there'll never be sort of this commitment, if you will, to European integration. And I think members of the European Parliament need to understand that as well. That if the national parliaments are not involved, then it's very difficult to advance the integration process. And of course, we're starting to see this in trade issues already. Various even regional parliaments, blocking trade agreements, etc., etc. So the more movement we get there between national parliamentarians, European parliamentarians, the better. Then I can be blunt about, the relevance of the European Parliament in European Council meetings. I mean, what happens, with all due respect, the President of the European Parliament comes to the European Council meeting, makes the first intervention, reads it off a paper. Then the president asks, are there any questions? Then out of courtesy, there might be one. And then the president of the European Parliament leaves, and basically that's it. Then we start the real meeting. So, there is a difference between the executive branch and the legislative branch.
Okay, thank you very much, Alex. Johannes, do we have any other questions?
There is another question. I don't know exactly about the time, because I know that Alex perhaps has to go. But if we have 5 minutes, we can raise this question very quickly, and then you can conclude with a summary of, if it's fine, I can go through the question. There is a new question from Daniel Schulz saying, all the speakers appear to be in agreement that Europe has had a great crisis this time around. To what extent do you believe this reflects lessons learned from the problems of addressing the crisis of the past decade?
If I can, because I have to jump, I am sorry, but when you have a meeting with the rector set, then you have to go to it. I'll say it again. It's very difficult to draw exact parallels from the financial crisis to this one. The first reason is that every crisis has its own dynamic, in many ways also its own genesis. And it's usually very easy with hindsight to analyze what happened in the middle of the crisis. But when you're in the middle of it, to be honest, analysis is quite far away. You're just trying to survive. And I think we had 3 crises. One was the financial crisis, come sovereign debt crisis, come euro crisis. Second one was the migration crisis. And the third one was Brexit. And they all had a very different characteristics. Some of them bonded us, others took us apart. But the difference with COVID is that on the economic side, it's both a supply and demand crisis. That's what makes it very different from the financial crisis. Also, this is not a crisis where we're bailing out big institutions and banks. We're actually bailing out people and companies. So it hits, the real economy in a different kind of a way. We're basically giving money, of course, based on loans to people, not to banks. So that's what makes it all a little bit easier. What the outcome in the long run is, I don't know. So in that sense, I think the stars were aligned for this crisis to be successful for Europe, because there's a certain welfare state mentality in all of this. It's very difficult to get this crisis wrong, no matter how much you disagree. But now I'm afraid I have to go because I have my next Zoom.
Well, thank you very much for this.
Thanks.
My suggestion at the end would be we meet again in the end of July after the next meeting, and then we see who was right.
I can tell you, Wolfgang, that I'm flying to Florence on Friday. I'll be there for a week, then I do another week. But after that, end of July, I'm going to be on holiday. And this is a great thing when you're not in politics. You don't have to go to the European Council in the middle of your holiday. During the Greek crisis, I had a 10-day holiday in Italy, twice to Brussels. My family wasn't very happy.
Okay, so that's the advantage of your new life. Hope will be successful as your former lives. Mendeltje, perhaps you, and then Brigid.
Well, obviously, bye, Alex. Obviously, when looking back at the different crises, the multi-crisis or the poly-crisis hitting us in the past decade, we see now that we are actually repairing all the flaws in the institutional architecture, which had to be made because speed demanded that and required that things were designed very quickly. Although democratic oversight was, I would say, the loser at the end of the process. And basically, I'm not very optimistic on this one. I must say. Although I must say that in the end, obviously, domestically things play out for citizens, and I would really like that all those stakeholders with transnational interests, and then I mean companies and transnational organizations, also find their national parliaments and their national capitals to make their voices heard, so that we can, as Alex said, we can tie the national capitals with the Brussels bubble, so to say, and open up all those channels that are quite normal at the national level, media, stakeholders, companies, and which are, I would say, not working very well properly when European issues are at stake. So that would be my dream for the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Brigid.
So has there been learning from the financial crisis to this crisis? I would say absolutely. Look at the speed with which the European Central Bank intervened with the PEPP. It took a very long time for Draghi to say whatever it takes, whereas this time there was an intervention very, very quickly. Also, the Eurogroup came up with the first bazooka, the 540 billion, and now the negotiations that are breaking taboos on the MFF and the recovery. The speed, for me, the speed and the urgency represents and reflects a learning. In terms of the longer, so the EU always struggles precisely because of this multi-level game between the ability of heads of government both to be accountable to their domestic parliaments for what they do collectively in Brussels, and also then the collective responsibility. I think it's a tension in the EU between the national and the European that's inevitable. You get that sort of tension in all federal systems, and the EU is a quasi-federal system. But it depends on whether or not heads of government are clear and transparent enough with their own citizens about what they do on their behalf and what they agree to at the Brussels level. It's very easy. John Major came out of the Maastricht Treaty in Maastricht negotiations, and he said game, set and match to the United Kingdom. That was the treaty that set up the euro. But that was his immediate reflex was to say game, set and match to the United Kingdom. Well, we know it was neither game, set nor match to the United Kingdom. So there's got to be, heads of government have got to think about their shared responsibility for this polity that the EU has become, and shared accountability. And that requires, because in the end there's no incentive for them in that they all go back to their national electorates to be re-elected. But there is a collective incentive if the system as a whole and not just the parts function.
Okay, thank you very much. My short lessons from our debate will be first on the issue of teaching. And I mean teaching not just for our students at different grades, but for the public. I think we learned a lot also on how the European Council works. And I think that's important to make it understandable to everybody, and also the limits of what they can achieve. And let's say the questions of how they should relate with the national parliaments and national audience. I think that's very important to get this kind of first-hand impressions. A second point is for me on the future. Now, let's say if I listen to much of the press and philosophers, starting from Habermas and others, many of them claim, we are in a totally new ball game. There's a new kind of situation. Societies, economies will be different. Now, I'm always skeptical about having, let's say, this kind of analysis so shortly after things happened. But we should be aware that there are a lot of things changing. I mean, if I just look at the EU, the control of state subsidies, how this is getting, let's say, watered down. And this means much more than that the Commission might say two companies might join or not. It's, I think, a very important part of the industrial structure. And here comes in the term which has been mentioned, this of strategic autonomy, which comes from the military side, defense part, and has now entered also the health policy. And I think everybody of us were surprised how we were dependent on imports coming from Southeast Asia, and especially from China. Again, I don't know how this will be taken up. So I think this is one of those issues which is going beyond, beside, whatever you might call it, the financial side of it, or linked to it, but also different. So my point would be that we should be very careful about seeing what kind of foundations of our present understanding, analysis of this European Union might change in terms of economy, social, political life. I think we are in an early stage. I'm agreeing that what is being done from Europe, if you might call it, is very promising. It's a good reaction. But if this will work, first of all, on the ground, let's say each project needs to be reasonably well organized and leading to a result, and overall to the political climate in Europe, I think we don't know yet. That's the present case. It's normally the case for our kind of work, but we should be aware. Learning from lessons would be a third point. Now, I would even go longer, because I look always at the history of the European Council. And the European Council was the result of a crisis. This was a crisis with the end of Bretton Woods, with the oil shortage after the Fourth Middle East War in 73, 74. So the European Council was always a reaction of member states, we should not forget it, member states, to say we need somehow to solve problems together, under this pressure. And of course, in each of these cases, people said the members of the European Council had different ideas. And quite often they were brought together in complex consensus formulation. So I think we should not forget it. About the speed of the crisis, I have, let's say, one crisis I would like to mention, which is quite often forgotten, because it took only, I think, 2 months, 4 months. It was the crisis about the German unification. At least for those who have lived at that time, have realized that the basic understanding of, let's say, the geopolitical situation within the European Union was put at stake. And there are still quite a lot of people who say the monetary union was only agreed upon by Germany because to pay for the German unification. I think we can learn from that, because that was done also in a very short period. And there were a lot of confrontations within the European Union on that. So my general remark is, as Alex said, each crisis is different, quite clear. But we find certain patterns where we find that somehow the leaders of the generation of the leaders somehow realize this is something we need to answer together. So they are from different parties, different backgrounds, some more nationally oriented than others, but still they are all let's say, coming from national systems, and they all agree to do more for Europe or in Europe for their own national interests. I think that's a very important point. So I think that's something on our research agenda. Johannes, my, let's say, immediate reaction for some would be, why don't we meet in this or slightly changed condition again at the end of July? Because I think we should continue this debate, reacting to what has happened, and perhaps the School of Transnational Governance can do that. I would like to thank you and all the team in Florence or wherever you are, I never know where people are nowadays, for this work. And I think also especially the panelists, all of them, and I hope that we can continue this debate. European Union won't get boring. I think even for those who have studied it for a long time, there are some lessons where we say, oh, we have seen that a little bit before, but I think each time we need to realize there are different and other conditions which we take into consideration. I also thank everybody who listened to us, and let's hope to continue this debate for the sake of our academic and political community. All the best to you, and looking forward to our next meeting. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.